join us for our October employment seminar, Resources Employers Can Use Today. That is on October 17th from noon to 12:30, and the registration link is in the chat. And we are fortunate to have HDI's own Austin Nugent and Morgan Turner as our subject matter experts. So please join us if you are able. So our objectives today are to define universal design, describe the importance of universal design in stay at and return to work strategies for workers with mental health diagnoses, and then to hear how Retain can support workers in their stay at work and return to work goals. So with that, I am excited to have Dr. Rumroll, PhD, CRC, as our subject matter expert today. Dr. Rumroll is Retain's co-principal investigator, professor of counselor education at the University of Kentucky, and director of research at the University of Kentucky's Human Development Institute. Dr. Rumroll holds a master's degree in counseling from Keene State College in New Hampshire and a doctorate in rehabilitation from the University of Arkansas. He is well known as one of the leading disability and employment researchers in the United States, and has authored or co-authored more than 450, wow, that's a lot, professional publications, including 16 commercially published books, Foundations of Vocational Rehabilitation Process, Emerging Disabilities and Rehabilitation Counseling, Case Management, Research and Rehabilitation Counseling. Dr. Rumroll's extensive experience is in administering funded research projects and has had leadership roles on 44 grants. He has received numerous awards and honors for his work, including Distinguished Career Awards from the American Rehabilitation Counseling Association, the National Council on Rehabilitation Education, and he has won 9 Best Research Article Awards from ARCA and the International Organization of Social Science and Behavioral Research. So, wow, we are very glad to have you with us today, Dr. Rumroll, and I couldn't resist. I had to show off your mom Shirley's seamstress skills with this picture of you and in the suit that she made for you. So backed by popular demand.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. You must have been talking to my mom when she sent you that photo, because she's the only one I think who's kept track of all that stuff. But that's a great introduction and very humbling. My dad told me a few months ago that he figures I've got a great future behind me. So I think there might be a compliment in there somewhere. But delighted to be with you all today, and I'll give a visual description of myself. And I happen to be wearing a larger version of that same suit that my mother made for me when I was 6. I'm wearing that today. But I'm a 55-year-old white male. Pronouns are he, his, and him. I have very little hair on my head, and what's there is mostly gray, hazel-colored eyes. I'm not wearing that suit, actually, folks. I'm wearing a white shirt with a red tie, and I'm sitting in a nondescript background in my home office. I'm wondering why I'm wearing a tie when I'm calling in, but it's just I just wanted to see if it matched. So I'm glad to be with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we're glad to have you and to hear about universal design to promote mental wellness in the workplace. So we're going to kick it off with our first objective and talk about the concept of universal design. And it's not a new idea. It is a common thread of everything that we do here at the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. However, when we applied in work setting, universal design, or UD, as we'll refer to it sometimes, provides rehabilitation and other fields invested in social justice with a new way to approach equal access to employment. And that includes all of the domains of meaningful societal participation, education, healthcare, community participation, independent living. As the name implies, UD is designed that is usable for all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized measures. While rehabilitation professionals like myself, as well as employers, continue to assess what the workers need to do for the job, UD can assist in improving a worker's physical and mental access and a sense of belonging in the workplace. And we know that's very important. UD consists of a set of strategies to make environments, products, and policies that are usable to the broadest array of people, and has been around for decades, but its meaning has been expanding during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, when we talk about UD, we consider spaces to include physical and virtual environments. And today we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to talk about how universal design can promote mental wellness in the workplace. We consider people with disabilities as the primary beneficiaries of universal design, but people across the lifespan who have different styles of learning, different preferences and needs, and different body shapes and sizes can also benefit from universal design. When we think about using universal design at the outset of an employment situation, we in fact may eliminate the need for an individual accommodation entirely. If a space is created with accessibility in mind right from the start, it's less likely to require retrofitting after the fact, and the need to provide accommodations for qualified employees who require them will always exist on a case-by-case basis, but UD principles may lessen those individual needs. And Dr. Rumroll is going to give us some specific examples of that in a few minutes. This results in two sets of strategies to use to maximize someone's ability to be successful in that given environment, individual accommodations and UD. But these strategies are not mutually exclusive. Indeed, when we use them both in tandem to promote the full participation of everyone, the result is inclusion. So what we are looking at here is our brochure at the Human Development Institute that shows all 7 principles of universal design. And in the following slides, we're going to apply the 7 core principles of universal design to the needs and concerns of workers with mental health diagnoses, as well as other disabling conditions. Dr. Rumroll, let's take a deeper dive into each one and how we can apply this to someone with mental health considerations in the workplace. So we're going to start off with principle number 1, which is equitable use, which means that the design is marketable to and used by people with diverse abilities. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Rumroll, to take it from here.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. And I think, and welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us. I think that applying universal design principles to mental health considerations is really, don't need to, we all know this, it's especially important in today's world. You know, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has just been an absolute disaster to people's to our public health systems, to our mental health. Incidents of stress-related disorders, anxiety disorder, depression, substance use disorder, trauma-related concerns up 20-30% throughout the pandemic, domestic and intimate partner abuse, sexual assault. I mean, it's just been a very stressful and traumatic time in our society, and you know, that's one part of it. So if you're an employer, you're going to be dealing with a wider range of mental health concerns, and some of them are going to be even more pressing than they were before the pandemic. We also have at our hands the national labor shortage, where we need to keep qualified and productive workers in the workforce more than we ever did before, because there just aren't enough available workers to support the economy. So employers certainly want to be accommodating. They want to attend to these myriad mental health concerns that COVID-19 has wrought upon us, but also we need, it's not just that we want to, we have to, if we want to maintain a viable workforce. And so the impetus for that becomes, I think, really important. And I think this universal design becomes a great, overlay for that. And principle one of equitable use is really not by accident that we start there. These are not hierarchical necessarily, but the fairness and inclusiveness of the workplace, of your policies, of everything you do as an employer is a very important determinant of the mental health of your workforce. So for people with mental health diagnoses, feeling that they're treated fairly, feeling that policies apply to them just as they do to everybody else, that all rules in the workplace are evenly applied, that how we configure things like leave and time off, need for accommodations, promotion, disciplinary decisions, access to benefits, the terms and conditions of employment, that everyone who works there has the same fair and equal shot at taking advantage of the well-known health and mental health benefits of working. And so those features of the work environment that make people feel included, that there's fairness and trust that's built into that the workplace is a safe place for people to be, can be in its presence a protective factor for mental health, as we call it. In its absence, if people don't feel that, you're going to find diminishing mental health among workers. Those with pre-existing mental health conditions are going to exacerbate their condition. They're going to be re-traumatized and have more difficulties, and you're going to see more time off related to mental health concerns and things of that nature. So an inclusion-oriented workplace becomes an important way to promote mental health. Do people have access to employee assistance programs? Do they know where help is when they can get it? And does everyone have equal access to that? Really, really important. I do also want to commend to your attention two very well done scales where employers can actually self-assess their own disability climate. One is the Disability Equity Index by our colleagues at Disability In, formerly known as the Business Leadership Network. And I think, Kimberly, you have a link to that if people wanted to check that out. Our colleague, Dr. Fong Chan from the University of Wisconsin, and his colleagues have also developed a disability inclusion profiler. These are fairly similar measures that come at the construct of disability inclusion from slightly different theoretical bases, but both of these are very useful and instructive, and you could also obtain a copy of Dr. Chan's disability inclusion profiler through a link that we have on our website as well. So if you're wanting to assess the inclusion index or climate in your workplace, this is a good way to do it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a lot of great information, and both of those links are in the chat for the disability inclusion profiler as well as the disability equality index. And I think that's a great place for employers to start to do that assessment that you talked about, and for individuals with mental health diagnosis to know that they're not pressured to disclose their disability, and that when they do, it's kept confidential by the employer. So I think you made some really great points as to how employers could ensure that there is equitable use for individuals with mental health diagnosis in the workplace. So thank you for that.
Yes.
So principle number 2 is flexibility in use. And this principle emphasizes that universal design can accommodate a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. And I think we often think of this maybe in a physical sense, but tell us about how this is also important and universal design can be utilized for people who have mental health considerations.
Well, and I think flexibility, if there's one word that would just capture what's required to help workers to navigate the mental health environment that we're living in today, and it is flexibility. And haven't we had to do that with COVID-19 in every way imaginable? We've had to have people pivot from in-person employment to telecommuting and things of that nature, and the stresses that go along with that, not just for the worker, but for the employer as well. This is a very difficult thing to do. Then we're going back to a reopening of society. We go back to work, or maybe we don't, and maybe some people can keep working from home. Maybe they don't want to come back into the office. There's all of those combinations. We're dealing with folks with disabilities. There's the need for some to continue to socially isolate if they're immune compromised, for example, or depending on their own comfort levels and things like that. So being flexible, not so much in the use of physical space, although that's important too, but flexibility with regard to things like scheduling. And schedule modifications, folks, are the most common form of workplace accommodations used by workers with mental illness nationwide. This according to our friends at the Job Accommodation Network. So we're not usually having to buy technology or equipment to accommodate mental health considerations. It's flexibility in the scheduling, in the sequencing of work. Are people able to work at home if they need to on a particular day? Do we have safe spaces within the workplace if people perhaps are experiencing an interaction with a customer or a coworker that ends up being, that might re-traumatize them? Do we have the supports in place? These are things we didn't have to think about in quite the same, to quite the same degree prior to COVID, but it's here. And that ongoing uncertainty about what's happening, with the pandemic is inherently stressful. And so flexibility and being able to pivot is really important. And everyone on this call already knows this. So this is really nothing new, but scheduling, sequencing, pacing of work, the days that people work. Is it a 4-day work week that does well? Do people need time off during the middle of the day or a break to go perhaps to counseling or therapy appointments or to 12-step meetings, whatever it might be? And if you want to keep good and loyal and productive workers, we've got to be more accommodating, or if you will, flexible than we ever have before. And I know everyone who's hiring and working with people now, you're in the middle of all this. You know this better than I do, but I just underscore that word. It's just so very important, and it's never been more so, I would submit.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have a question. Someone asked if a worker has a way to implement universal design for mental wellness in the workplace, who would they approach at their employer?
Yeah, it really that really varies. I think generally though, you want to respect the chain of command, and if I were advising the worker, what I would say is go to your next level supervisor. You don't ever want to go over your boss's head, right? But you ultimately do want to get up as high in the food chain of the organization where a decision can be made. So depending on what that might be, let's say it's a different structure in terms of how breaks are taken, or it's a different use of the break room if people need it, or people want to gather after work to discuss common issues and concerns, want to do more socialization outside of work and want to connect and have an affinity group of some kind that could be formal, could be informal. Generally speaking, you start with your direct report and work your way up that way. And that doesn't mean that if you don't get the answer from the person who's your immediate supervisor that you can't continue to pursue it. Some organizations are oriented where you start at the top, you go right to the executive director or to the CEO. Most don't operate that way. And so understanding that corporate culture is really important. But I usually like to, I think all politics is local. And so you start off with the person you know the best, who's most familiar with you and your circumstance, with that initial good idea. But Kimberly, you've done a lot more employer consultation than I have with a wider range of employers. Would you add to that?
I think you're right on point with that. And there was a second part to that question, is if an employer declines implementing that request, what next steps could they take? And I think, you were talked about follow the chain of command. I think that is exactly what I would say. We also have a question
Change.
about, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Who would be a place or person someone with a mental health diagnosis would recommend to their employer for information or training on universal design? So I would say we have a lot of resources at the Human Development Institute for information and training on universal design. So that would be my recommendation. Check out our website, and we're going to share some more of that information as well. Dr. Rummerl, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I have a few, and if this person would like to contact me off air, I'd be happy to send a few direct connections. But there's a growing in the field of occupational therapy. I know there's a growing interest in this notion of psychosocial ergonomics. And so ergonomics used to be the physical arrangement of the workplace. Now it's looking at the psychosocial features of the workplace, and is it really helping to facilitate productivity and mental health? And so looking at that, and I'm going to contact our colleague, Kimberly, Dr. Karen Jacobs of Boston University, who's a very prominent occupational therapy professor. She's done some work in this area too, and I'm going to get some recommendations there. I would also recommend, of course, our friends at the Job Accommodation Network. They've got tons of information and resources around making the work environment more conducive to mental health, and some great strategies and links there as well. And the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, also provides really good consumer input, and will do trainings as well about the psychosocial features of the workplace. I'd commend them to your attention as well.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to go ahead and move on to principle number 3, that is simple and intuitive use, regardless of the application. It's design that is simple and intuitive and is easy to understand. So Dr. Rummerl, give us some examples of this specific to mental wellness in the workplace.
Yeah, we really believe that it's better for people's mental health and morale in the workplace if expectations are clear, if they are made plain to everyone so everyone understands them, if the expectations regarding how people interact with one another or specific approaches to customers can be behaviorally delineated, that's helpful. We want to focus on things people should always do, should never do, and then the gray areas in between. So if there are do's and don'ts about comportment in the workplace or about adherence to company policies and organizational procedures, those just need to be really clear, transparent. Kimberly's going to talk about language level in just a minute, but understanding expectations, and also a place to go if you have questions and a need for follow-up. And this is sometimes a cognitive or intellectual or literacy issue, but sometimes it is a thought processing or concentration matter. And so if you have a mental health diagnosis, just think about times in your own life when you felt, say, depressed or anxious. So people dealing with depression or anxiety or a stress or trauma-related disorder, sometimes you don't register information in the same way that you would if you weren't having those conditions, because you're distracted, your energy is affected, et cetera. And so the clear, short sentences and plain language, and Kimberly, you're going to talk about that. I didn't mean to preempt you.
No worries. No, and we do have resources in the chat for that. There's a great podcast on our HDI website that the link is there about plain language, and also plainlanguage.gov is another resource that can be used to really help employers or even workers if you're helping develop the policies and procedures and information that needs to be shared, to do that in plain language so as to promote that mental wellness in the workplace. All right, we are going to move along to principle number 4, and this focuses on perceptible information. And what this means is that communications with all workers are accessible and understandable to them, regardless of their ambient conditions or sensory abilities, and that we're providing information in different modalities, such as a combination of images, sound, text, and tactile inputs. And I think this really kind of leads very well after what we just talked about in Principle 3. But Dr. Rumrell, give us some additional examples of this.
Well, it also has to do with the work environment itself. So it has to do with the procedures and policies. Are they in a format that people can access and interpret easily? But also the environment itself. And it talks about ambient circumstances like noise and distraction, or the temperature of the workplace, those kinds of issues, the lighting around. Are there hazards, physical hazards in people's paths and things of that nature? And being flexible, once again, to use the overused term, can people use headphones, earbuds if they need to? If it's a distractive environment and we want to minimize that, can people relocate in various ways? Can they work at home to accommodate some of those ambient circumstances as well? So the idea of perceptible use applies to the workplace, but we also can look closely at how work is performed and whether that's being done in the ideal circumstance for folks as well, taking into account all ways that people process information and stimuli within the environment. And just because you have a mental health diagnosis doesn't mean that you're particularly sensitive to noise or lighting or whatever it might be, but there might be issues with distractibility. Some features in the environment, like loud noises, can serve as triggers for mental health symptoms. And so it's important to, and again, you can't always predict this, so it's important to have an open line of communication so that people can come and share what their concerns might be. And so this is not the inclusion that you can't use a measuring tape or see how wide the doorway is. That's important as well, physical access. But around mental health and morale in the environment, we got to look at these ambient features of that environment as well.
Those are all great examples. So we're going to move on to Principle 5, which is tolerance for error. And this is where it minimizes the hazards or the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. So tell us about how we can do this specific to mental wellness in the workplace.
Well, and we do have the unfortunate phenomenon, and it seems pretty persistent, folks, where people with mental health conditions are the most highly stigmatized group of workers in our economy. We know that they're subject to high levels of discrimination, high rates of harassment and intimidation on the job. And so if someone is perceived as having mental health disorders, we'd like to think that everyone would be sensitive to their concerns, but evidence indicates that just isn't the case, And there's an ongoing issue with other workers and employers and customers not understanding how people's mental health concerns manifest and not being sensitive to what their concerns may be. So let's say we have a situation where someone, perhaps inadvertently, perhaps intentionally, triggers someone's mental health condition. Does that person who is experiencing the trigger, can they take a break? Can they walk outside? Can they go make a phone call if they need to talk to a support person? Is there a safe space in the break room? If there are issues going on, whether at work or in their life, that are triggering their symptoms in some way, can they work at home? Do you have mental health day provisions as people need them? Maybe they don't need the whole day off, but they need part of a day. Do you have an open line of communication for people to express those concerns? So while we'd want to be inclusive and sensitive at all times, we know that that's not always how it works. And so when there's a fracture in our own best effort to make sure that people's needs and concerns are honored and we're trying to meet them, then we need to have contingency plans in place, and it's better to have those. And this is true with any kind of accommodation, but just from a psychosocial and morale perspective, we think it's more important that we have these plans in place, because the way that mental health concerns might be triggered in the workplace, it's not as it's subtle quite often, isn't it? And so when that's the case, people have to be able to, whether that's take a break, address the concern, however that might be, and that as these things happen, there are corrective actions in place to remedy these situations, to continue to make the environment as inclusive as it can possibly be for all workers regardless of their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in Kentucky, a lot of employers have pursued the training of their workforce to receive the mental health first aid certification. And that really is a way that, if somebody had something happened that increased their symptoms of their mental health diagnosis, a coworker with that certification may be able to identify that situation and help get them to that safe space or get them the help that they need. So that's another example of tolerance for error, doing that additional certification and training for coworkers.
Unquestionably.
All right, so we're going to move right along to principle number 6, and this is low physical effort. And Dr. Rummel, I have to say, you really helped me think about this very differently, because once again, I see this graphic of somebody using hand sanitizer, and I thought, this is a very physical type of universal design principle, but really, you're going to tell us how it's very applicable to people who have mental health considerations.
Well, thank you. I hope it is. Here, what we're thinking is take this principle of low physical effort, that a device or a product works best when people don't have to work too hard to get it to operate, right? Really feel the same is true for accommodations related to mental health or for people to address their concern. So is it easy for people to access the 6 counseling sessions that are provided as part of your EAP, Employee Assistance Program, for example? Can they do this very quickly without a bunch of paperwork and without a lot of time that goes on from the referral? Sometimes people will come in crisis and need that help right away. So can we make the referral first and do the paperwork and get the documentation after that to make sure that we're intervening as quickly as we possibly can? Early intervention is so very important. Do people not have to work too hard to get the accommodation they need? So if somebody needs some time off or a schedule modification, you could run it through HR and make a determination and make them go get documentation of their disability, or you could give them the day off that day that they need it, or let them have an extra break if they need to, let them take some work home with them, and then work out the particulars if need be on an ongoing basis. But in other words, don't make people work too hard to get their needs met, and don't make the process so bureaucratic that they won't bother coming for support. And so when they feel they can do that, they're going to, perhaps more often, if you're open for business as far as that goes. But what you're going to do is you're going to solve smaller problems before they become bigger ones to a greater degree than if people find barriers to addressing whatever their concerns are. It boils down to communication and safety and feeling that people can go and address these concerns in that way. But the easier you make it for people to open up to you about what those concerns are, the better able you're going to be to help to meet their needs.
That sounds great. And we're rounding the corner here with principle number 7. And this is size and space for approach and use. And it's basically size and space that are designed for a product or activity should permit all users to engage with the product or activity, regardless of their body size, posture, or mobility. And once again, I tend to think of this in a physical type of sense, but you enlightened me. And so share with everybody how we can use this principle for people with mental health considerations as well.
Well, here we're just thinking about the psychosocial aspects of physical space. How is the workplace laid out? Does it work for everyone to have a cubicle situation where there's 4 desks bumped right up against each other with dividers? And maybe it does. Maybe for other people, they need more space than that. Does having too much physical proximity to another person perhaps trigger someone's symptoms of whatever their mental health diagnosis might be? Sometimes that's true. Does not having enough proximity and support from coworkers make people feel isolated and perhaps trigger that as well? And looking at the physical layout of the work environment, in addition to those ambient features of the environment, we find to be a very important consideration as well. So it's looking at the possible affective quotient, if you will, of how people are situated and configured in the workplace. And workplace design is really an interesting thing because it really does change the way you feel. Think about when you rearrange the furniture in your living room or whatever, you feel differently about it. Or you go upstairs and you move the bed over to the window and all of a sudden you feel like you've got more space. It makes people feel good. It makes you feel like you can operate more. And there are ways of setting things up that make people feel better and worse and more and less comfortable, and having people have a hand in that if they can. And then flexibility. Sometimes people may want to go and work at the public library on their laptop. Is that okay? Can they work at home? And we've learned to make these kinds of accommodations. Usually we're thinking because of people's physical needs, but understanding that these can also have a mental health consequence as well, and really promote a mental health and morale and employee longevity, which is what we're trying to accomplish by taking a close look at how the physical layout of the environment might be affecting people's mood states and also their interactions with one another.
Yeah. And I like when you and I were preparing for today, you shared the example of, someone who might have seasonal affective disorder. Lighting is very important. So, we're looking at how that may impact the design in the universal design process. So, yeah, great examples.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time today. And I think we've answered all of our questions. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at kimberly.wickard@uky.edu. And I really like the introduction, Dr. Rumrell, that you gave us today to many things, but the psychosocial ergonomics. And I think maybe there will be an employment seminar in the future on that, because that's something that's really intriguing. And I think we really need to look at that to be able to fully help individuals in the workplace.
It does sound good. And now I've got to go read and learn more about it because I said it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us. And you're getting some hand clapping, Dr. Rumrell. So thank you for that as well. And all of our recordings are on YouTube at Retain Kentucky Media. And please fill out the survey and let us know what you want to learn more about in the coming months. Thanks so much.